Francesca, I mean, this is a presidential race that is going to be run on the margins, right? At least that's what we expect. That's what we've been expecting for years. And that's why it can be easy to overlook a group like African American voters who, again, vote so overwhelmingly for Democrats. But this isn't about Republicans winning a majority or even close to a majority. All you're talking about is moving the margins by a few percentage points in their favor. And that can have a huge effect in, say, the city of Milwaukee or Philadelphia or Detroit, in these battleground states that are going to determine the election. But it feels like, just like everything else in this election, those efforts and maybe whatever inroads the Trump administration have made have been complicated now. And that's a generous term, I think, complicated by the coronavirus and their response to it.
In certain states like North Carolina, South Carolina, and Florida, African Americans are catching coronavirus at a higher rate than other demographic groups, and they're also dying from it at a higher rate than other demographic groups. And that is data that the White House has affirmed and the president has repeatedly pointed to. And yet, to the point before yesterday, there had not been specific action from the White House to address this. They had held some calls with African American leaders, including Black pastors, and there have been outreach in the administration to minority business owners. But as far as a strategy to combat those deaths among African Americans, that is just not something that they had seen. And they believed that that also came from engagement with them. They felt that the calls that they had weren't enough. On a call with the vice president and the surgeon general, they weren't invited to speak at all. They just heard from them for about 25 minutes or so. And they had advice that they would have otherwise given to the White House. Now, that advice differs depending on whether you're a conservative or a liberal. I'll point out conservatives are more likely to say that personal responsibility is at play here and that people who are in vulnerable communities need to take more precautions. They need to wear gloves. They need to wear masks. Whereas liberals are more likely to say that this is a systemic problem about community healthcare and healthcare in general that has been going on for decades. And so yesterday, I will say, you saw the White House at the briefing open up after my story ran and talk about this and unveil some new strategies and potentially some new opportunities where they could work on this problem. And we will be following up on that.
You know, Adam, according to the exit polls from 2016, Hillary Clinton won the African American vote with 89%. Compared to Donald Trump's 8%. That was actually a little off what Barack Obama did in 2008 and 2012. And of course, the overall turnout in the community was also down from those years. However, that's obviously still a commanding advantage. How seriously do you take the GOP's efforts to reach out to the African American community? Do you think that there are any inroads that they can make?
Yeah, I certainly think there are limited inroads they can make. And when we're talking about, Republican outreach to black voters, we're talking about it at the margins, right? We're not talking about somehow Republicans are going to magically make up, 80 plus percentage points or whatever and win this group. It's all at the margins. And as you mentioned, Hillary Clinton already ran a little bit behind what Barack Obama achieved with black voters during his two presidential bids. And some of the recent polling that has come out in battleground states, now that we're kind of in the general election portion of the campaign, suggests that Joe Biden's also starts off a little bit behind where Hillary Clinton ended up in 2016 and has some work to do to consolidate those voters. And I think, Alex, as you've done some reporting on already, is that Republicans really see an opening, particularly with young black men and young Hispanic men as well, which is sort of an ancillary part of this as well. And so, if they can even, eat into the Democrats' advantage with this group by a couple of percentage points, obviously that makes a huge difference at the margins in states like Florida, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, that were only decided by a handful of votes. So obviously the coronavirus response that the White House has been leading these past few weeks, I think certainly complicates their efforts to do so. But that doesn't mean that Democrats can just take this group for granted.
Yeah, I mean, Francesca, it seems like, look, what you're saying is this is a bigger problem in the African American community, but we haven't seen the sort of requisite response from the White House as of yet. Now, maybe that's changing. Look, in the big picture, this obviously matters to the health and safety in the African American community, but this is a politics podcast, and it also matters to the Trump reelection. Can you just take a step back? This is a president and a Republican Party that at least says it's intent on trying to make a real effort with the African American community in this presidential election. Can you describe some of those efforts and how might the response to the pandemic begin to complicate that?
Absolutely. And while we didn't get into the politics of that as much in that particular story, extrapolating from that, this is something that the president and the Trump campaign have talked about in the past. The president had been promoting Black unemployment and how those numbers had been declining before this global crisis. And the Trump campaign had said that it was going to be opening up these street front stores, so to speak, in which they would have Black Voices for Trump outreach. And those were going to be in urban communities like Atlanta and Charlotte. And also there would be some in Florida and other places. Those have not opened up yet, of course, because the entire economy shut down and people went into self-quarantine. But that is still something that I've been told that they are looking to do. And so as you marry that with the White House response, which is a little bit different than the campaigns, I was hearing from Black conservatives who said that over the past few years, even though the president has been saying one thing, they don't feel that the White House has done the work to put together strong coalitions of African Americans who can take the White House message into those communities, not just when it comes to coronavirus, but any issue. And when they have reached out to Black leaders, they feel that too often it has been folks that are aligned with the Democratic Party or liberal pundits. And they cited very specific people like Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton. And I spoke to Al Sharpton for my story, and he agreed that the White House needs to do a better job of reaching out to African American Republicans.